Hello, my name is Tihana Kraš, and in this presentation, I will discuss the relationship between the two languages of a bilingual child. Let me first explain what I mean by a bilingual child. In the presentation, I will use this term to refer to a child who has been regularly and frequently exposed to two languages from birth or soon afterwards, and who is thus acquiring two first languages. The type of acquisition that this child experiences is known as simultaneous bilingualism, or bilingual first language acquisition. The assumption underlying the claim that a simultaneous bilingual child is acquiring two first languages is that a bilingual first language acquisition is not qualitatively different from monolingual acquisition. More precisely, it is assumed that the two types of acquisition are the same as far as the developmental stages and the overall rate of acquisition are concerned. In the presentation, I will discuss two very important theoretical issues in the area of bilingual first language acquisition. One of them is the issue of language separation, which concerns the extent to which the two language systems of a bilingual child develop separately from the onset of language acquisition. The other is the issue of cross-linguistic influence, which relates to the extent to which the two independent grammatical systems of a bilingual child interact and influence each other. The issue of language separation revolves around the following question. Are bilingual children able to separate their two languages? Put differently, do bilingual children build one language system or two? Ever since the 1970s, there has been a consensus in the field that bilingual children are indeed able to separate their two languages without much effort or explicit teaching. In other words, the researchers have agreed that bilingual children build two separate language systems. A related question, which builds on the previous one, is the following. Do bilingual children build two separate language systems from the start, or they first build a single language system in which the properties of the two languages are mixed together? Since the late 1980s, the researchers have agreed that bilingual children build two separate language systems from the start. In the past, there were two different views on language separation. One of them is known as the single or the unitary system hypothesis. According to this hypothesis, children start with a single fused language system, which they later differentiate into two. A more elaborate version of this view proposes that language separation takes place first in the lexicon and then in the grammar. A contrasting view on language separation, and the one that is upheld today, is called the dual system hypothesis. According to this view, children build two distinct language systems from the start. Evidence for the single system hypothesis is twofold. The first type of evidence consists in the fact that bilingual children sometimes produce utterances containing words from both of their languages, or switch from one language to another within the same conversation. This phenomenon is known as code switching. However, code switching is present not only in children, but also in adults. And for adult bilinguals, it can certainly not be said that they're unable to separate their two languages. Also, it has been shown that code switching is systematic and used for a variety of social and communicative purposes, so it cannot be used as evidence of confusion in bilingual children. The other type of evidence consists of utterances containing words from one language only that are claimed to show interference between two languages. An example of this would be an instance of German word order applied to what is argued to be a possessive construction in Italian, as in Lisa bicicletta, interpreted as Lisa's bike. However, the mere notion of interference requires the existence of two systems that can influence each other, so it doesn't make sense to use it as evidence of an inability to differentiate between the two languages. Generally speaking, evidence provided in support of the single system hypothesis has been shown to be problematic. So this hypothesis was eventually rejected. On the other hand, evidence for the dual system hypothesis is very robust and comes from all levels of linguistic analysis: phonological, lexical, morphosyntactic, and pragmatic. As for morphosyntax, numerous studies have provided examples of utterances containing words from one language only, in which appropriate morphosyntactic devices and rules, such as bound morphemes, function words, and word order, are used. Here are some examples of correctly used word order in negative utterances from a study examining spontaneous production of 2 to 3-year-old French-English bilingual children living in Montreal, Canada. The relevant property is the position of the negator with respect to the verb. In French, the negator needs to be placed after the finite verb, post-verbally, while in English, the negator needs to be placed before the finite verb, pre-verbally. In the study, it was found that the children predominantly placed negators post-verbally in French, as the French grammar requires, as illustrated by sentences in French on the slide. On the other hand, the researchers in the study did not find any instances of post-verbal negators in English, which could be interpreted as instances of French word order applied to English. So, evidence from this study suggests that bilingual children use language-appropriate grammatical rules when they speak each of their 2 languages, and in turn, that they have separated the grammars of these 2 languages. It should be noted that the fact that bilingual children can separate their 2 languages from early on does not mean that their 2 languages develop always at the same rate, that the child has the same level of proficiency in the 2 languages, and that the 2 languages do not interact in the mind of the child. This last point brings us to the issue of cross-linguistic influence. The predominant view in current research is that the 2 independent language systems interact and influence each other in the mind of a bilingual child. This phenomenon is known as cross-linguistic influence. It is also generally accepted that cross-linguistic influence is not an indicator of a fused, mixed grammatical system. Cross-linguistic influence at the level of morphosyntax is one of the most intensively studied phenomena in bilingual first language acquisition. Despite this, conditions under which it occurs are not yet clear. It has been argued that cross-linguistic influence can manifest itself in 3 ways. First, it can manifest itself as transfer. In this case, a grammatical property from language A is incorporated into language B because a child has a higher level of syntactic complexity in language A than in language B. Second, cross-linguistic influence can manifest itself as acceleration. This is the case if a grammatical property emerges in language A earlier than in monolingual acquisition as a result of the fact that the child has a higher level of syntactic complexity in language B than in language A. Finally, cross-linguistic influence can manifest itself as delay, in which case the overall rate of grammatical development is slower in bilingual than in monolingual acquisition. Alternatively, the tested instances of cross-linguistic influence can be classified into 3 broad categories. The first category consists of higher rates of omission of particular elements than those observed in monolingual acquisition. An example of this would be higher omission rates of objects in the French and the Italian of a German French, Dutch French, and German Italian child due to the fact that null objects are used more often in German and Dutch than in French and Italian. The second category consists of the use of a construction that is available in language A in contexts in which it is semantically or pragmatically inappropriate in language B. An example of this would be the overproduction of overt subject pronouns in the Spanish of an English-Spanish child and the Italian of an English-Italian child, because of the obligatoriness of overt subjects in English. Finally, the third category consists of the use of a construction in language A that is unattested in monolingual acquisition. For example, the use of post-nominal relative clauses in the Mandarin of an English-Mandarin children due to post-nominal placement of relative clauses in English would fall into this category. A number of factors have been argued to predict cross-linguistic influence. One of them is the type of surface or structural overlap between the bilingual child's two languages. It has been proposed that cross-linguistic influence only occurs if there is a partially overlapping morphosyntactic structure in the two languages, so that one of the languages can reinforce the structure in the other language. For example, in Italian, subject pronouns can be overt or null, while in English, they can only be overt. As a consequence, English may reinforce the use of overt pronouns in Italian in an English-Italian bilingual child, leading to their overuse. Another factor are the language domains involved. It has been argued that cross-linguistic influence only occurs in the domain where syntax interfaces with pragmatics. For example, the use of subject pronouns in a null subject language, such as Italian, would be a good candidate for cross-linguistic influence, because the choice between a null and an overt pronoun depends on discourse pragmatic factors. Language dominance has also been proposed as a predictor of cross-linguistic influence. It has been argued that cross-linguistic influence operates from the child's dominant language into his or her non-dominant language. In addition, it has been argued that the weaker the language that the child has been tested in, the stronger the effect of cross-linguistic influence. Another predictor is the child's age. Some have argued that cross-linguistic influence is a developmental phenomenon that disappears over time with sufficient exposure. In contrast, others have argued that cross-linguistic influence is a stable bilingual trait that persists with age. The last predictor I'll mention is input quality. It has been argued that a bilingual child may be exposed to input in the family that already contains instances of cross-linguistic influence. In this case, cross-linguistic effects in the child's production reflect parental input rather than psycholinguistic processes in the child's mind. In a recent study, the influence of the first four of these factors have been analyzed, so all of them apart from input quality. The only predictor that has proved to be significant is language dominance. The child's dominant language was defined as the language of the society where the child lived, that is, as a societal language. What was found in the study is that cross-linguistic influence was stronger from the child's societal language into his or her non-societal language than vice versa. What has also become apparent from this study is that a more standardized and uniform way of studying cross-linguistic influence is needed to arrive at a better understanding of it. To sum up, in this presentation, we have seen that bilingual children separate their two languages from the onset of language development. They sometimes code switch, but code switching is not a sign of confusion. The two languages interact and influence each other in the child's mind. This phenomenon is known as cross-linguistic influence, and it is not a sign of language fusion. We need much more research to understand how exactly cross-linguistic influence operates. What parents and teachers should remember from this presentation is that code switching and cross-linguistic influence in bilingual children are not a reason for concern. They're a natural result of the fact that bilinguals have two languages in their mind that are in constant contact with each other. Thank you for your attention and to the EU for funding the preparation of this presentation. If you would like to learn more about the project within which this presentation was developed, please visit this website.